Good afternoon. Welcome to IPC Masterclass Season 2 in biosafety. And I can see a huge number of people registered, more than 570 registered. Participant has registered not only from India, from many different countries. That is the amazing to know that. I will keep it very short. We have today Dr. Rangareddy, who is the president of Infection Control Academy of India. He will be chairing the session. We will take up the questions. So whenever you have a question, please reserve or you can post in the chat box. Once you put in the chat box, I will keep it separately so that at the end of the webinar, we will put those questions to the speaker. Another information for all of you is that whenever there is a internet speed problem, the videos may go out, but the slides and the audio will be always there. Sometimes you still may get some problem in your view. There is a button, a red button, reconnect, just above your your mobile or device, wherever you're watching, above your window, reconnect. Please use that reconnect to get it rectified. All the issues get rectified through that. With this, I welcome.
Namaste, dear colleagues. A very warm welcome to all of the participants of the season 2 of IPC Masterclass. The last session had been wonderful with participation of more than 1,000 people. And this particular series, which is named as Biosafety, is going to be equally interesting. And today I would like to welcome the participants from all over India and also from Southeast Asia and Africa. A very, very special welcome to about 30 of our colleagues who are joining us from Cambodia. So, this particular web series is jointly offered by Infection Control Academy of India in collaboration with University of Hyderabad and with an academic grant from Sanmed Healthcare, the largest manufacturer of disinfectants and antiseptics. Colleagues, we live in an age where we are constantly bombarded with infectious disease threats. And the healthcare workers, we have a huge responsibility to our patients to be able to safely care for them. Biosafety and biosecurity, as we all know, are fundamental elements of effective laboratory services and public health in the global fight against infectious diseases. Despite this central role, many of the institutions and the laboratories are not having effective biosafety practices. These kind of circumstances, they pose a huge risk, and they may cause laboratory associated infections among healthcare workers, that is all of us, and the patients whom we are supposed to be caring for, and generally anybody who is visiting our healthcare institutions. So the main objective of this IPC Masterclass is to lower the risk of exposure at all stages in the healthcare system where biological agents may present a risk to all of us. Okay, so that is what it is. And as we all know, in India, as of now, we have very few dedicated biocontainment units. In one way, the COVID has done some good. That good is the government of India has finally understood the need for biosafety laboratories. And recently, the government has issued an order in order to establish new biosafety laboratories which are going to take care of the kind of requirement what we have in order to process the samples which are coming from various institutions. So unless we are going to have the right kind of knowledge and training among the healthcare workers, establishing just biosafety laboratories are not going to solve the problem. And if again we are going to be stuck with any epidemic or pandemic, we will be again into the same situation as we had been initially with the COVID-19 pandemic. So in order to address this particular concern and to improve sustainable laboratory practices and to increase biorisk management skills and competencies among those working with infectious diseases, Infection Control Academy thought it is the right time to introduce a program which is going to improve those competencies. All the webinars, which are going to be 5 in number, are going to be based on countries' current and future biosafety needs. And as explained earlier, the overall objective is in order to reduce the risk which is going to be posed by the biological things among the healthcare workers and the patients. We really hope you will find this educational journey, which is aided and guided by very eminent speakers and eminent infection prevention and control practitioners and experts. I am sure this journey is going to be both enjoyable and also useful, so that the patients of tomorrow infected with emerging and or re-emerging kind of infectious diseases, and those of us who are caring for them will be safe as possible, while we are going to provide service to our patients. With this brief introduction, I would be just giving a gist of the topics which we have mentioned, 5 in number. They are on your screens probably. It is going to start from the introduction to the concept to the biosafety and vaccinology. It is, probably one of those very rare web series which is going to encompass end-to-end biosafety requirements for healthcare institutions and the laboratories across India and other countries. These are the collaborators. You already know about it. I don't think I need to mention again and again. And now, without wasting much of time, let me very quickly introduce Dr. Aruna Pujari. Aruna Pujari is one of those very enthusiastic and very passionate infection preventionists in India. And I had an opportunity to work with her on a couple of occasions in the past, and I always get amazed with the kind of knowledge she possesses. At the same time, the ability to articulate the issues within the healthcare system and also providing the right kind of advice in order to overcome those problems within the healthcare institutions. Dr. Pujari works currently at Breach Candy Hospital in Mumbai. She is the head of department for pathology and microbiology. She has got numerous educational qualifications. I probably would not read all of them, but just for the sake of mention, she has got 2 degrees in microbiology itself. One is the DNB and the other in the MD clinical microbiology. Apart from that, she has done several courses in hospital infection control, and she is also a certified infection control specialist, which is a certification which is done by APIC and CBIC. And she has got numerous publications, and both international and national, and she has conducted various CMEs, as mentioned in previously, that I had the opportunity to work with her on some of those very, very interesting and very enlightening kind of CMEs. So with this very brief introduction, I would now request Dr. Aruna Pujari to take over. Ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Aruna Pujari, and at the outset, I would like to thank Infection Control Academy of India and Dr. Rangareddy Bhuri for giving me an opportunity to be part of this IPC Masterclass series on biosafety. This being the first topic, I am going to basically lay down the concepts of biosafety and we look at the various applications of biosafety in medicine and whether there are any concerns with respect to the same. We are currently in the midst of the coronavirus disease and almost 3.9 lakh deaths reported since December, end of December, and large number of cases globally. With this, time and again, people think about whether coronavirus and bioterrorism is related. People, there are now and then uh, media popping in statements from important dignitaries who ask about whether coronavirus is a lab developed virus. Sometimes even scientific people uh, calling it a lab developed virus, and really whether this is a lab developed virus, and if it is not a natural virus, then certainly it affects all of us, that a virus that probably is not natural has caused a global pandemic and led to so many deaths and so much of morbidity and its other collateral damages throughout the world. So is really biosafety a problem in medicine? What do we think about it? We already know about occupational exposures in healthcare workers. It's a given thing that healthcare workers get occupationally exposed to a variety of microorganisms causing diseases. Bloodborne viruses like HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, tuberculosis, influenza, shingles, and pertussis, to name some of them. In fact, I remember during my postgraduate days, our dean had announced that all residents will receive one egg a day for breakfast free of cost, because our number of tuberculosis cases amongst the postgraduate population was really, really high. So it's not unknown to us as healthcare workers to be occupationally exposed to certain diseases. But there is also another entity which is called as laboratory acquired infections. And there are many publications on this particular entity, and this comes from Clinical Infectious Diseases, published in 2009, which shows that a whole lot of bacterial and viral diseases can actually be laboratory acquired when laboratorians are handling them in the laboratory. And while we might advocate standard precautions, but in specific settings, we need additional measures to be taken care of whenever there are such biosafety concerns. Another report coming from Asia Pacific, which also looks into the need for improved biosafety. And here again, if you see in the first table, there's a whole lot of countries which have reported laboratory acquired infections, which could range from bacteria to viruses to parasites. And here again, a whole lot of microorganisms belonging to the risk groups 2 and through 2, 3, and 4, causing infections in laboratory personnel. And these could be, in fact, a lot of them are actually zoonotic infections. So we need to be very, very careful about biosafety in veterinary and zoonotic diseases also. We also have a lot of evidence in literature about bioterrorism agents, where both organisms as well as their proteins, which are basically toxic agents, have been used as bioterrorism agents to harm people. That again brings in the concern of how biosafety is important to all of us. And that brings us also to two terminologies, biosafety and biosecurity. They are not the same, but have certain principles which are similar. Biosafety is basically protecting people from germs. whereas biosecurity is protecting germs from people so that people do not manipulate microorganisms and create harm to public, to animals, to plant, or to the environment. So with those, let's move on to the main part of the session. So we look at what are the terminologies associated with biosafety. We look at how biosafety concerns are important in healthcare and how biosafety has a lot to do with biotechnology. And finally, we will come down to what could be the components of a biosafety program in an institution. So let's begin with some terminologies. What is a biological agent? A biological agent is a microorganism or a biological toxin or a protein or a human endoparasite which occurs either naturally or it could be genetically modified, and it has potential to cause infection, allergy, toxicity, or otherwise create a harm to human health, animals, or plants. A biohazard material is an infectious agent or a hazardous biological material that presents as a risk or potential risk to the health of humans, animals, or the environment. And it can cause damage either by through an infection or indirectly by damaging the environment. And biosafety comprises of all containment principles, technologies, and practices that are implemented to prevent unintentional exposure to pathogens and toxins or their accidental release. Now, these are terminologies related to biosafety. Now, let's look at terminologies related to biosecurity. What is biothreat? A threat that is posed by a harmful biological agent. This could be a bacteria, it could be a fungus, a viral pathogen, or maybe even toxins, is called as a biothreat. Bioterrorism or biological warfare is the deliberate release of pathogens with the intention of causing harm to human beings, animal, plants, or other living organisms in order to influence the government or to intimidate civilian populations. Biosecurity, therefore, comprises of principles, technologies, and practices that are implemented for the protection, control, and accountability of biological materials and or the equipment, skills, and data related to their handling. Biosecurity also aims to prevent unauthorized access, loss, theft, misuse, diversion, or release of these organisms that can be used as biothreats or bioterrorism agents. What is biodefense? Biodefense comprises of medical measures that are used to protect individuals against bioterrorism. And this involves interventions like drugs or vaccines. In addition to that, research and public health preparations to defend against biological attacks also form a part of biodefense. So now let's look at how biosafety is important to healthcare, and I would like to project this in terms of two perspectives. One is from the point of view of the laboratory healthcare worker, or in fact healthcare worker in general, both those working in laboratories or those working at the bedside. And the second perspective would be the patient's perspective. A patient who gets exposed through diagnostics or therapeutic interventions, mainly because of various biotechnological advancements that are happening, which have brought in improvement in the quality of life, morbidity, and mortality. How do healthcare workers get exposed to biosafety concerns? Naturally, there's a whole lot of events that can happen. Specimen collection, for example, if you consider nasopharyngeal swab specimen collection at this point in time in the midst of the COVID pandemic, that is certainly a biosafety concern. If appropriate measures are not taken by personnel who are collecting specimens, they can get infected. Microbiology specimen processing within the laboratories, handling of blood and body fluids and their processing within pathology laboratories, performing autopsies in laboratories, then handling cell lines in research laboratories, and finally even day-to-day examination of patients with infectious diseases. And many a times we have our OPDs that are full, and these could be dedicated OPDs to infectious agents, for example a TB OPD, or for example a fever OPD, where in a crowded setting it can certainly pose biosafety concerns to the patients who are there as well as to the healthcare workers who are working in that particular area. So with that, we move on to how biotechnology and biosafety are really related. And this is a was an excellent paper that I came across, which has talked about a variety of cell lines and how these cell lines are used in biotechnology for producing medicines, for example, insulin, for example, producing vaccines, a whole lot of vaccines for a variety of diseases, for producing gamma interferons, which can be used as therapeutic agents, or for that matter, even and these cell lines and producing even antibody diagnostic kits. These cell lines can be derived from animal organ cell lines, or they could be human cell lines, as you can see here. And these are extensively used in both diagnostic as well as therapeutic interventions in clinical medicine. Another very important publication which I came across, where a whole lot of human pathogens which can serve as contaminants of animal cell lines is seen. And naturally, when they are human pathogens, they are going to, if the cell line is contaminated and is not identified, these can cause infections in human beings. But more important, these cell lines can also get contaminated with animal pathogens. And occasionally, it may so happen that these contaminating organisms, which are animal pathogens, may cross the species barrier, causing infections in humans. And there are examples of such microorganisms like viruses like the H5N1 influenza, the severe acute respiratory syndrome virus, and bovine spongiform encephalopathy related proteins. So one has to be very, very careful when using cell lines, and we've seen that they are extensively being used both for diagnostics as well as therapeutics. Another important advancement in biotechnology that has actually helped clinical medicine is the use of viral vectors for gene therapy, or for the production of vaccines, mass production of vaccines. And there are a whole lot of such vectors which are used for this purpose. And when a new vector or a new gene is being tested as a clinical trial, one must therefore ensure that all the biosafety concerns with respect to the virus vector undergoing any change, which could be hazardous to patients who are receiving these medications eventually, should be looked into. Another concept is that of oncolytic viruses. These are viruses basically which are injected into tumors, and they bring about lysis of the tumor cells. Now here again there is a biosafety perspective that we need to be aware of. From the point of view of healthcare workers who are handling these oncolytic viruses for injecting them into the patient, from the patient's perspective, it is toxicity, and liver toxicity has already been described. Along with that, there can be other end organ toxicity also, which has been described. Plus, oncogenesis because of these oncolytic viruses could be because of mutations that might happen in them. And finally, if these patients who are injected with these oncolytic viruses, if they are not isolated after the injection, they may be responsible for exposure of the virus to family as well as contacts. Coming to another very, very important branch of biotechnology and advancement in therapeutics and diagnostics in medicine is the use of nanomedicine, nanomedicine with a lot of nanomaterials being available. And as you can see here, there are a lot of clinical applications. There are instruments which can be used for diagnosis of a variety of disorders. But do we think that nanotechnology is really safe and has no biosafety concerns? So it is not really like that. It's already known that titanium dioxide and carbon black nanoparticles may possibly be carcinogenic to humans, and this has been put forward by WHO and International Agency for Research. Another study which has shown that it can actually cause sensory neuropathy, and it may occasionally also cause other end organ damage. And it has been seen that clinical trials that use these nanomedicine products often do not pay much attention to the biosafety or adverse effects of these nanoparticles to the human body, but concentrate mainly upon the therapeutic effectiveness of the drug. So one needs to be aware that biosafety concerns can also come into picture with nanomedicine, and therefore this should be taken into consideration whenever such products are being evaluated. Similarly, there could be concerns about parasitic agents which may be genetically modified, and very importantly, the use of probiotics. I think probiotics are used in all ages, including premature neonates, very often these days, and one needs to be aware that there can be biosafety concerns about probiotics. In fact, in my own experience, I've had at least 3 cases of bloodstream infections with probiotic agents. One of them, the youngest one, being a premature neonate who had a bloodstream infection with the probiotic agent that was being used for that patient. So we now know that biosafety is a very important aspect of clinical medicine, and we must give adequate significance to biosafety concerns whenever we work around with microorganisms, be it for diagnostics, be it for therapeutic interventions. So that brings us to a biosafety program. Being an essential part of medicine, every institution should definitely have a biosafety program. And this biosafety program is executed through the biosafety committee with a biosafety officer who is in charge of ensuring that all the SOPs and the documents are in place and get implemented. They would review the biosafety needs of the institution and ensure that all components of the biosafety program get implemented. They would also ensure training and compliance to the SOPs that have been put forward by the biosafety committee. Now, what could be the components of a biosafety program? The first would be understanding the risk, the pathogen that is causing risk, and categorizing it according to what is called as risk categorization into risk groups. Second, very important, would be how is this infection going to get transmitted. Third, the host, which is the vulnerable population where this infection will be caused. Subsequently, risk assessment and then a risk mitigation plan should be put up as a part of the biosafety program. So the first part of the biosafety program is going to be identifying and being aware of what are the biohazards within your own environment. And these could be biological agents. They could be recombinant or synthetic nucleic acid molecules. They could be biological toxins and venoms, blood and blood products coming out of animals or human beings, nanoparticles as we've already seen, and even environmental specimens coming out of plant, soil or water samples that will serve as reservoirs of high risk biological agents or toxins. So once you have identified the hazards in the environment, then comes the risk group categorization. Now this risk group categorization is based on certain features of the microorganism like pathogenicity, like virulence, mode of transmission, the host range, availability of preventive measures like vaccines, availability of effective treatment like antibiotics or antiviral agents, and for recombinant materials, it would be the type and pathogenicity of the host, gene expressions, what are its targeted effects, and so on and so forth. With that, risk group categorization is done, and this is given by the World Health Organization, and organisms are classified into 4 risk groups. Risk group 1 is those biological hazards that are rarely associated with disease to adult human beings or animals and pose no public health risk. Here, the caveat would be that if the susceptible host is an immunocompromised host, then certainly even these organisms can become pathogenic. Risk group 2 are those which are associated with mild and moderate disease, for which preventive measures or post-exposure treatments are often available and there is limited public health impact. Risk group 3 are those ones that are associated with serious to lethal human disease, for which preventive vaccines and post-exposure therapies may be present and the public health impact is limited to moderate. And finally, risk group 4 comprises of organisms that cause serious to lethal human disease, for which preventive vaccines and post-exposure therapies may not be present, are not present, and the public health impact is very high. And here comes the typical Ebola, Marburg, smallpox viruses, the filoviruses basically. So once you identify your environmental hazards, you go about categorizing them, and this is the categorization that one follows into risk group categorization. Then how do these infections get transmitted? So they are going to be transmitted either as inhalation by droplet or airborne mechanisms, ingestion by the mouth, injection of damaged injection into damaged skin and tissues, or absorption through the gut or intact skin. Then comes the host factors. Now, the host factors play a very important role in the outcome of an exposure or infection, and the factors that would increase this susceptibility would be underlying diseases, particularly of the host immune system, extremes of age, prior treatment with antimicrobial agents, anti-cancer drugs, steroids, vaccination status of the host, and naturally the type of pathogen or the agent to which the host is exposed. So on an occasion, these are opportunistic pathogens, but because the host is immunocompromised, they will cause disease. Or it might be a primary pathogen which will cause disease even in a healthy individual. And once all these four have been done, we naturally go about putting down risk reduction strategies. These again can be classified into four groups. One is risk awareness, two is the control of materials, three good practices in the working areas, and finally restriction of access. And let's look at each of them. What do I mean by risk awareness? So once you know what are your biological hazards, you have categorized them based upon the risk categories or risk groups. You know about who your host is and how your infection is going to get transmitted. Risk assessment should also take into consideration what kind of procedures are involved in this exposure of the organism. So what are the concentration of the organisms that might be seen, the scale of the procedures, whether animals are being used, whether there is a sharp that is being used, whether there is a potential for aerosol generation. Is this a field procedure or a laboratory procedure? And what is the experience of people who are handling such microorganisms? So once risk assessment is done, this risk assessment has to be communicated to the teams who are actually handling these microorganisms. Subsequent to that, the biosafety committee also looks at materials and procedures that are available within that setting to ensure biosafety practices can be complied with. Containment recommendations are to be implemented, and standard operating procedures are developed and communicated once again with the team. So this is all about developing SOPs and ensuring, training people and ensuring that all your SOPs are actually implemented. Then comes the control of materials, where containment is done as per risk assessment. Materials whichever are received are labeled and securely stored as per risk assessment. Biohazard inventory needs to be documented thoroughly, maintained and controlled. And secondary containment should be used whenever such biohazard material are being stored or they are being transported. The third way of risk mitigation is to ensure good work practices, and this should be followed by each and every individual working in that particular area to ensure that workplace hygiene and personnel hygiene principles are followed. Individuals should wear personal protective equipment based upon risk stratification and risk assessment and manufacturers' recommendations. There could be signaling mechanisms to communicate risk hazard like a placard or biohazard labels. Very important that biohazardous waste is disposed of according to local or national guidelines. Decontamination of surfaces with effective disinfectants used for appropriate contact time for that particular pathogen also becomes an important part of good work practices. And finally, to communicate and follow emergency response procedures like spills, personal exposures, and injuries will be part of good work practices that needs to be followed both in clinical as well as laboratory areas where biohazardous materials are being handled. And the last part of risk mitigation would be restriction of access. So any area that has such biohazard material stored should have restricted access, and it should have security procedures which are defined by the biosafety committee and as per the institutional policy. These areas should preferably be designed in um, placed farthest away and away from all traffic. Any equipment that is serves as a storage equipment need in common areas should be secure. It should have a placard with content of the owner's name and other contact information in case any emergency arises. So with that, we have completed the risk mitigation plan as well. Now, containment plays an extremely important role in biosafety and is almost central to the principles of biosafety. What do we mean by containment? Containment basically comprises of safe methods or properly managing infectious agents in the laboratory environment such that they are easily maintained and handled without causing any harm to people who are handling it. The purpose is basically to reduce or eliminate the exposure of potentially hazardous agents to both laboratory workers or clinical team members as well as the external environment. Containment can be classified as primary containment and secondary containment. Now, primary containment basically includes use of personal protective equipment and protecting the immediate laboratory surroundings from exposure of agents using both good clinical and microbiology practices and the use of safety equipment. Vaccines also become a part of primary containment measures. What is secondary containment? In secondary containment, apart from the immediate environment, the environment that is external to this area which is handling biohazardous material, one needs to protect that area also from exposure. And here comes a combination of facility design and operational practices. So overall, containment can be achieved by using three elements. One is good clinical and laboratory practices and techniques. Two is safety equipment, and three is facility design. And how these are worked around with would certainly depend upon what is the specific agent that is being encountered and what is the risk assessment from the point of view of work that is being done in that particular area. Now, when it comes to the laboratory and handling of hazardous materials, the laboratories can be classified into four different biosafety levels. This can be with respect to testing clinical specimens or diagnostic specimens, or it could be even for research laboratories. And all of these biosafety levels are basically specific safety regulations to work around with organisms that pose a threat to human health and to ensure that laboratorians who are handling these organisms do not get infected. They include precautions, special practices, and decontamination procedures. Accordingly, laboratories are divided into four biosafety levels. Biosafety level 1 is to work with least dangerous pathogens and therefore requires the fewest precautions, whereas biosafety level lab 4 requires the strictest of method to dealing with agents that are most dangerous to human health. Now, I am not entering into the details of BSL practices because this is going to be a separate section taken by by the next speaker in this session, and I will leave it to just simply introducing the four biosafety levels. Another very important aspect of biosafety would be how we follow standard precautions. And standard precautions are a set of practices that need to be followed by any healthcare worker anywhere, in the laboratory, in the clinical areas, in the field, anywhere, even for animal labs and epidemiologists. It comprises of hand hygiene, respiratory etiquettes, personal protective equipment use, safe injection practices, sharp safety, biomedical waste disposal appropriately, safe management of linen, environmental cleaning and disinfection, and sterilization and disinfection of equipments that are used for handling microorganisms as well as for patients. And it's very important part of biosafety that we ensure standard precautions are always followed by healthcare personnel. And finally, any program is not a success unless and until we train people who are using this set of practices. And therefore, training in biosafety is something which is extremely important to every healthcare worker, which should be done at induction as well as periodic in-service trainings. A hands-on services or training is always better. It should be multidisciplinary, and preferably competency assessment should be done. And an excellent example currently that we are facing within the corona pandemic would be the use of PPEs by healthcare personnel. Donning and doffing was probably never taken as seriously as it is done today. And we have our clinical team members actually coming and asking us to show them procedures of donning and doffing and ensure that they are trained in doing these procedures, especially doffing out well. So, training and particularly hands-on training helps a lot in ensuring that that safety practices are complied by healthcare workers. So, with that, I finally conclude with this session on biosafety, introducing concepts that biosafety is central to clinical and laboratory medicine. Every attempt must therefore be made to identify biohazards and to mitigate the risk. A planned approach would always help in quick resolution of breaches. Training staff on biosafety measures is crucial to practice, and every healthcare worker must be made responsible for ensuring biosafety within his or her own surroundings. Thank you.
Uh, Dr. Aruna, thank you so much. Despite of the fact that, we had some technical issues, I think, the session really has enabled us actually to platform further sessions, which are going to be developing based on today's talk. Uh, a big thank you for covering end to end from the basics to giving the perspectives on exposure in labs and bedside. Because in today's COVID-19 scenario, most of us, the healthcare workers who are in the front line, now we are really, really at a very high risk of getting exposed to the coronavirus. Giving those perspectives and giving actually the nitty-gritties of sample collection, giving the nitty-gritties of blood and body fluids and how to handle the cell lines and recommendations on how to manage the animal cells and giving a very gist of biosafety program and how to constitute the committee which is supposed to be handling the biosafety program, and also giving the components which are supposed to be part of the biosafety program, and finally giving us and our participants a kind of risk categorization. How do you categorize that, and how do you assess that, and what is the kind of role we as healthcare workers had to play in order to reduce the risk, both for self and also for our patients who come with a lot of hope to us. I think you have created a good base in order to take care of next 4 sessions, who are going to the colleagues again. Those are experts in the field of infection prevention and control, so that they can go and take a deep dive into all those individual components what you have talked about today. Thank you very much, Dr. Aruna, and I hope the further sessions are going to be glitch-free in terms of technology, and I hope the participants are going to get both, the enjoyment and also, take away a lot of good lessons from the further sessions. Thank you, Dr. Aruna, and thank you all the participants from all over the world. And we look forward to see you all in the next session after a week. The next Tuesday would be the next one. That session would be taken by Dr. Mustafa, my colleague in Infection Control Academy, who is my General Secretary, and again, an expert in infection prevention and control. He will be taking that class, and I look forward to see you all again. Mr. Pranav, is there any announcements to be done?
Yeah, so as I said, and you can see in chat box, I have written the URL sanmed.live live live/certificate. So those of you who could not got the certificate, you can go and identify your certificate and download it. There are 40 people whose email got bounced. Remaining all have got the certificate, and many of you have already acknowledged that also. Thank you very much. Those who could not get, please go in this website sanmed.live/certificate and get the certificate downloaded.
Once again, thank you very much. Have a good time. Stay safe, stay live, and be happy. And we will actually reconnect again on next Tuesday.